Welcome everyone. Pleasure to have the opportunity to moderate today's discussion on Free Hungary in a Stronger Europe, in which we are going to talk about rule of law issues happening in Hungary, but not only in Hungary, also in the European Union in general. And I have the pleasure to invite such distinguished guests from political parties and also from civil society organizations. Before I introduce them, I would like to ask you to have a seat. No, there is no special order. You can sit in whichever order you wish. All right, so let me introduce very briefly the members of this panel. We have Birgit Sippel, who is member of the European Parliament in the political party group of the Socialists and the Democrats, and who also happens to be the coordinator for the so-called Libre committee, the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. We also have Kretschmer with us, who is head of advocacy at Reporters Without Borders. András Léderer, who is head of advocacy of Hungarian Helsinki committee. We also have Sándor Rónai, who is member of the presidency of the Democratic Coalition, the Hungarian political party. Ágnes Urbán, media analyst from the Hungarian media watchdog organization called Mérték. And last but not least, Áron Demeter, who is head of research and communications at Amnesty International Hungary. So it's a pleasure to have you all, but since it's a very rich panel with a lot of panelists, let me just go through the structure or the rules of this panel discussion. So we will start with a very short introductory speech by Birgit on the rule of law issues in general. Then we will have 3 questions discussed by the panelists. First, we will start with a general evaluation of the state of the rule of law in the member states of the EU, including Hungary. Then we will move on to the reactions of the European Union, how the European has been handling the rule of law issues, and we will end the discussion with some possible ways of cooperation between civil society organizations and politicians. And if we have the time, we will also have a very short Q&A panel, but it means that everybody has to keep the time frame. I'm not going to be just a timekeeper, I'm also going to be an umpire here, and I will exercise my authority mercilessly. So please keep the time limit very strictly. There is nothing left to do except for passing the floor to Birgit to deliver a short welcoming speech.
Thank you very much, and thank you for also indicating a short introduction. I hope that around about 10 minutes are deemed to be a short introduction. And I will start by thanking everybody for organizing this important event, thanking everybody to be here. And I hope that at the end of the day, all together, not only people in Hungary, but also all the others, say, yes, there is a challenge for all of us to protect rule of law and democracy all over Europe with all the differences that we see. But now that we are here in Budapest, let me start by thanking that only 2 weeks ago we held a plenary debate in Strasbourg on the program of activities of the Hungarian presidency. Now, Orbán from the very beginning left no doubt that he wanted to use this debate in order to show us how he imagines to make Europe great again. You might have heard something similar from another politician. So a European Union under authoritarian nationalistic leadership, a European Union not supporting Ukraine but close to Russia and China, a union not serving all people in Europe, no matter which origin, background, income, gender, sexual orientation, but only serve a very small group of straight white people, if I may say so, men, with a certain level of income and with a clear anti-democratic and hostile agenda. More than 6 years have passed since we in the European Parliament launched the so-called Article 7 procedure and called on the Council to identify the risk of a serious breach of European values in Hungary. Has the Commission done anything? Partly yes. A series of infringement procedures against Urbán's government, the proposal for applying the so-called conditionality, and further proposals for freezing funds by applying the conditions for the European funds. Unfortunately, in the broad majority of cases, such moves only came after we as Parliament had been calling them for a long time, and too often the Commission has given in way too early. Has the Council reacted during these 6 years? Barely, and clearly not proactively. A few pro forma sessions on Article 7, the approval for the freezing of funds much less ambitious than the Commission proposed, and for the rest, most silence. Has the situation nevertheless in Hungary improved? No. Under Viktor Orbán's leadership, Hungary has been moving even further away from democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights. And step by step, act by act, Orbán has been undermining media pluralism and independence. And after public broadcasting turned into a propaganda machine, several private media outlets were taken over by the state, by oligarchs with close ties to Fidesz, or silenced entirely. So thanks to all this, Orbán's party controls over 4/5 of the country's media. And I'm not talking about digital media, that's another issue. With this, he has built a true media empire subject to his party and his ideas. And also, in order to make his life easier, for years, Hungary has been in a constant state of national emergency. At times because of COVID, at times because of migration or the war in Ukraine, whatever argument suits Orbán best. And this allows him to bypass democratic scrutiny and govern his country in the way he wants. And just to mention two of the latest examples of the urbanization in Hungary. At the end of last year, Orbán made it possible to spy on government critics with the new so-called National Sovereignty Act and the Sovereignty Protection Office. Interesting wording. With its extensive powers, this office has a system of surveillance and sanction which fundamentally violates the standards of democracy, such as the principle of free and fair elections, the rule of law and fundamental rights, and it breaches multiple EU laws. And it's good, but we don't know the outcome yet, but it's good that the Commission decided in early October to refer the Hungarian government to the European Court of Justice. But things continue. Only in April, Orbán made his puppet parliament of Fidesz allies adopt the so-called Omnibus Act, which gives him access to protected information and court decisions. And this allows him to influence the judiciary completely in his sense and therefore to suspend any judicial independence. The terrible truth is, all these measures not only undermine the very principle of rule of law, but they worsen the lives of Hungarians day by day. Despite all of Orbán's big talk about great Hungary, inflation in Hungary has been the highest and incomes the lowest in the whole of Europe. Hungarian property prices are exploding. The welfare system and public services are decaying. Corruption is blossoming. The latest report from the Court of Auditors estimates the level of irregularities in EU programs in Hungary to be the highest per capita in the EU. But even what's worse, we have been witnessing that other countries are beginning to copy the Hungarian developments. Only this past summer, Bulgaria virtually copied Hungary's 2021 anti-propaganda law, a law that bans LGBTIQ plus content in schools and on television under the guise of protecting children. A law that is nothing but state-sponsored LGBTIQ hostility and political sponsorship. And now it's time to stand up and act. It's time for all of us to ensure that our vision for a Europe that builds on democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights is not only a vision but reality. For all of us together, it's time to ensure that the European Union remains a state built on these three pillars. The sad example of Hungary under Orbán's rule has painfully demonstrated what happens if European heads of state and governments turn a blind eye for much too long. And this is why I'm very happy that today Budapest becomes the stage for a gathering of democratic, socialist, and fundamental rights activists determined to finally bring about the change we have been calling for so long. And against all these backdrops posed by Orbán's authoritarian rule, and I have only mentioned a few, unfortunately, the Hungarian presidency is also a unique opportunity to show that democratic forces and progressivism continue to exist within Hungary and are willing to defend their country against Orbán. And even though I have not been happy about the spotlight with which presidency has put on Orbán, I have been very happy that the presidency has also set the international spotlight on the devastating undermining of democracy and the rule of law taking place in Hungary. We are already facing the end of October. Within little more than 2 months, Orbán's political farce at the top of European Council will be over. We have to ensure that the spotlight turned on the rule of law situation will remain. We have to ensure that once the presidency is over, Orbán cannot pursue his agenda unchecked on the sidelines. And we have to ensure that the end of the Hungarian presidency in the Council will also mark the beginning of the end of Orbán's rule in Hungary. And as I said already, this is a task not only for people in Hungary, it's a task for all of us together. So let's start our discussion.
Thank you very much for the opening remarks. And as I promised, we will start the discussion with a general evaluation of the rule of law in Hungary and in the European Union. So we are 14 years after the beginning of the rule of law crisis in Hungary. And even though chronologically speaking, we can say that it started in Hungary, it has become absolutely clear that this is not a Hungarian phenomenon. This is a Europe-wide phenomenon. One can argue that it's even a global phenomenon, which has very serious manifestations in Hungary as well. But what the Commission's rule of law reports have been telling us is that there are systemic problems also in Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Italy, Greece. We can see very concerning trends in Sweden now. Even some well-functioning democracies such as Germany and France are showing signs of rule of law problems. So I would like to invite the members of the panel to highlight some of the biggest challenges that the rule of law is facing in Hungary and in the European Union. Of course, that's an impossible task to do in such a short time frame, but if you absolutely had to choose some of the biggest challenges, what would it be? And please focus on media freedom, judicial independence, and civil society if you can. So let's start from András Léderer, and then we will move in that direction.
Thank you. Well, you actually provided my answer. So, because also these three problems are very strongly interconnected, and not just when we look at the implications, but also when we look at the methods used mainly by the Hungarian government, but also its allies that are copying many of the methods in Bulgaria, in Slovakia, previously in Poland, and quite likely in a number of other countries. One key issue we are seeing, and I think I can say it in the plural, when it comes to the rule of law problems at the EU level, is that although the toolbox, the EU's available rule of law toolbox, is quite diverse, and it has some really effective tools at its disposal, some of them are not used at all, and those that are being used are not necessarily used in the best way possible, to say the least. To give you one example, and that also relates to the introductory remarks, we all know that the conditionality regulation has been triggered against Hungary, and just in a couple of weeks' time there is going to be a very important decision to be made in Council, whether Hungary was able to fulfill the requirements set out in the December 2022 Council decision regarding mainly anti-corruption matters. We have seen how the Hungarian government has been using its veto powers in order to gain leverage over, for example, rule of law matters over the other member states. And we are seriously concerned as Hungarian civil society, who provide regular assessment and input to European institutions, to members of the parliament, but also to member state governments. We do not see any meaningful improvement on the ground. Very similarly to what happened on the field of the judiciary, small steps in the right direction, but far from full implementation. Nonetheless, there is a risk that for clearly political reasons, all of these concerns will be put aside, and the leverage that EU institutions and member states currently have over Hungary's illiberal regime will be exchanged for a vote on Ukraine, for a vote on budgetary issues, or whatever important issue will come up in December. So what we are seeing is that the rule of law, despite being the fundamental value of the European Union, is still something that is sometimes traded during these negotiations in exchange for other important decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, András. Let's continue. And maybe if you could bring the rule of law issues a little bit closer to the audience who are not necessarily experts in this field. Like, can you name a couple of, and also the other panel members, can you name a couple of specific problems? Because rule of law is a very general. So in the field of media freedom, for example, can you name a specific examples that are currently the biggest challenges in Hungary and also in Europe?
Okay, thank you very much. I try to be very short. Also, the problem map is rather big, and I would like to focus on a basic issue which is somehow less discussed, and it is the media capture issue. Because there are some elements of the media system which are more or less easy to capture with political power, like public service media or media authority, but it is not so easy to capture the media market in a member state. However, it happened in Hungary. On the one hand, we can talk about the ownership issues, and you are absolutely right that there is a huge media empire here in Hungary. It is also extremely important to mention the financial background of this media empire, and it is the state advertising. The state institutions, including the state-owned companies, put a huge amount of money to the Hungarian media system just to finance the daily propaganda. And it is also important to mention the so-called media ecosystem. Media ecosystem means that not purely the media companies are captured, but also the related industries, including the distribution systems, the advertising market, including media agencies, sales houses, and so on. Even the printing facilities. A government critical political weekly is printed in Slovakia because none of the Hungarian printing houses was willing to contract the publisher. So I think it is extremely important to understand the systemic way of the market distortion. It is not purely about the propagandistic public service media, not purely about the media authority, which is of course, a Fidesz-dominated media authority. Only the ruling party was allowed to delegate members to the media council, but it is a much broader problem, and practically the whole public sphere and the whole media market has been destroyed.
Thank you very much. We can continue with media freedom, I assume.
Yes.
This is the main focus of Reporters Without Borders.
Thank you. Yeah, as Reporters Without Borders, there's so many experts in Hungary, I will look more at a comparative perspective. And we very much agree actually with the rule of law report that sees or expresses concern about persistent risks to the independence of public service media in Europe, the safety of journalists, the state advertising issue that you just mentioned. And actually the report refers a lot to our press freedom index that we publish annually, and it also sees a deterioration of the situation of press freedom in the whole of Europe. Slovakia and Italy dropped the most, but then there's also stagnation of Hungary and also Greece. And the problems remain actually the same for a decade now or even longer. And the root causes, as you also just said, is really a mix of political and economic factors. And media plurality really is threatened by the ongoing concentration trends that are exacerbated by the digital transformation. I think that's also something that makes media outlets, media organizations vulnerable to also media capture, since if they can't really fund their business, then it's easier if the media owner changes to a person that actually can fund this media outlet. The poor working conditions for journalists, like in many countries in Europe, are also very much connected to this economic aspect. When we look at the risks of political independence or political independence, there's actually, like what we mean with that is like direct or indirect media political influence on media owners, the political control over public service media, state advertising and so on. That actually has stagnated over the past decade, which the Media Pluralism Monitor has found out. And that's not good news, because it's been on a very bad level, because at least 15 member states don't have laws that really provide conditions that inhibit such political control over media outlets or regulators and so on. And that's maybe, I want to close with that. I think that's also a root cause, because many member states have actually been passive or indifferent when looking at those developments in their own countries, but also all over Europe. So now the Commission really has to step up and address this declining situation in Europe.
I will concentrate on 2 points. We talked a lot about media. I will concentrate on so-called social media. And I think there is a fundamental problem all over Europe that at the beginning we thought, oh, they are no media, they are platforms. So they are not responsible for the content that is shown on their platforms. And this needs to change. They have to be made responsible, just last year, I think we decided on some legislation, but we have to make sure that this kind of hate speech, misinformation, manipulation ends, and that the platforms are made responsible, or if they don't follow the rules, we have to break down their business model. And to be very honest, if then Meta says, oh, then we will leave Europe, okay, let them go. I think there are a number of smaller companies who would be very happy to go into that gap, so we should not be afraid to be very straight on. And another second person, I'm very happy that we have the so-called conditionality, where we freeze the money from Hungary, because systematically Urbán is not following the rules, but this is also used by Urbán to put pressure and say, okay, you need my voice, give me the money. Therefore, I think it could also be an idea the new Commission should look into, not only to freeze funds, but at least part of that funds, take it completely away from Hungary and give it to those member states who follow the rules and implement legislation.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. Concluding the past 14 days, I can say that things went from bad to worse in the past 14 years. And this case, it's not done yet, so it's an ongoing issue. We can see it every day. Birgit just mentioned in the opening remarks that what Orbán said in Strasbourg 2 weeks ago. But I can repeat the Hungarian Prime Minister, the temporary president of the Council, what he said 2 days ago. He made an equal sign between the Soviet Union and the European Union. So it's a shame, and so it was terrible to hear that. Because of media freedom is a very important topic of this event, let me tell you a few examples how it works in Hungary. So even if the Hungarian government is saying that they want to unfreeze the European funds and they can fulfill every requirement so they can get the money. But on the other hand, we can see some terrible examples that Hungarian politicians, Hungarian oligarchs close to the government, controlling the Hungarian media, newspapers, and TV channels, not to mention the fake news pharmacies or companies on the Facebook, on the social media. And the other bad story, the European Parliament had to create a committee on spyware, the Pegasus committee. The reason was the Hungarian example, because newspapers, owners of newspapers and businessmen were spied on using this Pegasus spyware. So unfortunately in Hungary, the Hungarian journalists cannot ask, investigate and work freely because they are threatened by the Hungarian government. That's the case. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's conclude the first round.
Thank you very much. And I just realized that I think I've done this type of panels like 10,000 times and still don't have the perfect 2-minute pitch for your question, Viktor, but I'll try. I'll talk about mainly two things, and one of them is rather a European issue, which is the decline of freedom of opinion and how freedom of opinion, and especially the freedom of assembly, is under target in many European countries. So what we see is that from France to Germany to Hungary, people are somehow not allowed to protest and demonstrate in controversial issues, of course, but still one of the hallmarks and one of the milestones of every truly working democracy is whether we let people tell their opinion, even if we think that's not true, or even if we think that's not what we stand for. And I think the latest blanket bans on several types of demonstration in the EU countries, actually good old-fashioned EU democracies, is a very worrying sign. On Hungary, many things have been said, but I think there is one issue that connects all these dots together in Hungary, and that is definitely the so-called, and this is now a cliche, but I have to say it, the chilling effect and the self-censorship. So what we see in our work is that no matter whether we are talking about Hungarian judges or Hungarian public officials or teachers or even NGOs and civil activists to some extent, people are afraid that if they do or say something that the current Hungarian government doesn't like, there will be some kind of punishment or repercussion on them. And it's really the thing that kind of poisons the whole system, because even if you are a multinational company in Hungary, you have to take into account that, for example, if you are standing up for the LGBTI rights in Hungary, will there be some problems with your business? If you are a book publisher who just wants to, publish a book and sell a book that says families should be equal and same-sex couples can be good parents, can I get fined? And yes, they can, and they are fined, and then they have to go to court. If you are a judge, you have to think twice whether you would even mention to your colleague that you don't trust that, for example, the Hungarian judicial reform is not perfect, or you have problems with how the central government is trying to influence the judiciary. So my point is that unless people are sure that their opinion, their professional opinion, and their work and whatever they do is protected and no one can come after them, no matter whether you're a high-ranking judge or a teacher in a kindergarten, if you are afraid to speak your mind, I think we'll be in trouble for a very, very long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much Thanks for your answers. So based on what you are saying, I'm sensing that you really want to move on to the second part of the conversation, where the juicy bits of the conversation lie. The operation of the rule of law mechanisms, because that's more exciting, a little bit more political. On the one hand, at the European Union, we have a couple of rule of law mechanisms. We have the so-called Article 7 procedure. We have also the EU budget conditionality, on the basis of which the EU can, in theory, withhold EU funds from governments violating the rule of law. We have the annual rule of law report of the Commission. We have infringement procedures. And many argue, both scholars and politicians and civil society organizations, that these rule of law mechanisms have very limited impact in reality. So first of all, I would like to hear your opinion on that. And also, I would like to mention that the European Parliament has been passing some pieces of legislation that could, in theory, improve the rule of law situation in Europe. I'm talking about the Media Freedom Act. I'm talking about the Anti-SLAPP Directive protecting journalists, or the Digital Services Act. So I would like to ask you to comment on that, and to make the conversation a little bit more heated, or moving in the direction of a debate, I would ask this general question whether the European Union is a solution to the rule of law problem, or it's actually part of the rule of law problem because it's so ineffective, or has proven rather ineffective until now. So let's start with Áron now, and then we...
Okay. I'll talk about the stuff that worked, okay? Just for a little bit. So Hungary and the Hungarian government was required to adopt the most significant judicial reform in decades because of EU pressure. As András said earlier, it was because of the conditionality mechanism, and it was because basically the EU has realized that if you want to have a rule of law country and if you want EU funds to be spent at least according to what they are for, you need a functioning and independent and impartial judiciary. The question really is, I don't think that whether EU has enough tools, but for me it's rather the follow-up. So it's fine that you are requiring the Hungarian government, for example, to have a judicial reform. They did it. It's far from perfect, but it's a very, very significant step into the direction that, for example, us and other organizations are advocating for many, many years. But it looks good on paper, but the question is, will it work? And unfortunately, what we see, and this is my criticism towards the EU and especially to the Commission and the Council definitely, is that even you have something on paper, it doesn't mean that people will actually implement it. And what we see when some of the funds were unfrozen a couple of months ago was that basically no one cared whether the judicial reform actually works. The more important part that it was on paper and there was a seal on it. So my advice, but I'm not sure I can advise the EU. So I would suggest that the follow-up of the implementation and to see whether what they are doing is actually in line what they promised is equally important than to have something written on a piece of paper.
Yeah, so we can remember a sentence coming from the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán said, "Look at what I'm doing, not what I'm saying." And it's true about what he's writing. So if we look at the Hungarian constitution, we can see that everything is all right. If we look at the national one, the national TV channel, it's a very good TV channel. You will feel much better, but unfortunately the reality is completely the opposite, so it's completely different. You mentioned the European funds which need to be unfrozen, but unfortunately the Hungarian government cannot fulfill the requirements, the super milestones, because if Viktor Orbán would follow the common European law and rules, then he will fail and a new democratic government would come, because it's the basic of his power not to follow the common European law and the common rules. A few days ago, I was in the countryside, and if we are talking about the European funds, we must say that the agricultural funds have already come to Hungary. But I met a lot of people who did not get salaries, even if they already finished their work, they didn't get salary from this program because the Hungarian Minister of Agriculture did not pay the money. So they didn't get the money from since August, and as they know, they won't have the money until the end of February. So that's the reality. On the paper, they are okay, they can buy food in the supermarket, but in the Hungarian reality, they do not have a salary, they do not have money to survive day after day.
Before you continue, may I just complement my question just a tiny bit? Because Yeah, so we can say that like the Hungarian government and many governments are disregarding the Commission's recommendations, or they are not. They are trying to play with what they have to trick European institutions and Western European governments to get off the hook. But of course, we need European institutions which are open to enter into these bargains, and we need Western European governments that are open to enter into these bargains. And what we see is that even Germany and France are ignoring the Commission's recommendations in the annual rule of law report. So since we have a general overview of European politics, may I also ask you what you think about the attitude of those European institutions and those Western European countries that are supposed to set the example and are supposed to be the well-functioning democracies leading the rule of law development?
Starting with this last part, I think one thing, we are just in front of the hearings for the new commissioners, and one question really will be, are the commissioners ready to really use all the measures in place to control member states, to ensure that what has been decided will really be implemented and enforced? This will be very important, otherwise you are right, nothing will happen. Just some days ago, and I hear it again and again, some politicians were saying with regard to the new pact of migration and asylum, oh, this shows we took a decision, so this shows Europe is in the position to be active, to act. But that's not true. It's just a piece of paper that we were able to agree upon. The real test is now the implementation. And to that extent, I thought I can be happy that the Commission started to do first step in the implementation, but to be honest, I don't trust them. So the European Parliament also decided to create a special committee on following the implementation of the new pact. And in general terms, I think it's more important than ever that the Commission is very strict. It might not directly help to change anything in Hungary, because Urbán might ignore, he is taking the money from Russia and China, so to that extent he will not be that dependent on European money. But being more strict with all the member states to follow the rules, and even more stricter in the case of Hungary to show we are tired, I don't say it like this, we don't want to have this any longer, so being stricter on everybody but also on Hungary could lead to the effect that at least other member states will more closely follow the rules, so that Hungary, Urbán, is more and more isolated.
How do you see that the work of civil society? No, I'm asking you.
Okay.
Do you see that the work of civil society organizations is paying off, in the sense that civil society organizations provide ample information and expertise to EU institutions when it comes to the rule of law mechanisms? Do you see that they are using this expertise in an adequate way?
I think with a lot of legislation, it's too early to say. I mean, the past 5 years has been, in terms of media freedom and the European Media Freedom and Act, as all that you mentioned, and HASLAB, has been very positive. But again, there are pieces of paper. Now it's really up to us and up to all the EU institutions to put it into, or to put it into tangible progress. And that's yet to see. And I would also, I think our expertise has been taken serious, but again, there's so many layers of now bringing that, and it needs really actual political commitment. And I think it would start with the EU Commission to take its own sanctions really seriously. I think you mentioned it earlier, it shouldn't be, rule of law shouldn't be a bargaining chip, like we saw last December, when in the very same week, a third of the frozen funds were released to the Hungarian government. And in the very same week, the Sovereignty Protection Act was passed in the Hungarian parliament. This shouldn't happen at the very same time, because maybe it's too late for Hungary, I don't know, but what kind of signal does it show if you use rule of law as a bargaining chip and trade it off, basically? And also with maybe just where we come in also, where I think as experts on media freedom legislation, we're really happy about the European Media Freedom Act and DSA and their approach to media regulation, which is, as you said, holding the platforms accountable, but also it focuses very much on deleting and blocking content, and that's one way to go about disinformation and problematic content. But what we would suggest, and that's yet to be taken up, is to also another set of European policies which would focus also about bringing the quality journalism that is put to the margins back to the center, and that needs another level of support financially, technically, and also physical protection of journalists in Europe.
Thank you. Ágnes, do you think that Hungary is beyond hope, as it was suggested?
I'm always optimistic, so I do not say that it is absolutely hopeless. But however, I think it is a big challenge, not only for the Hungarians, but also for Europe. And the term implementation was mentioned several times. And I would like to give you an example about the importance of the implementation and how the existing regulatory frameworks and regulatory tools should be used. Our NGO, together with some other actors, had 2 complaints submitted to the European Commission. These complaints were based on the competition law, which is a very, very strong regulatory tool in the EU. The first complaint was submitted 8 years ago. It was about the unlawful state aid of the Hungarian public service broadcaster. After more than 7 years, the DG.com decided that it is not problematic at all. The state aid of the Hungarian public service broadcaster is absolutely okay. Although it is obviously doesn't comply with the EU regulation, and I don't want to go into details, including the complete lack of transparency in the whole financial structure. And the other issue, the other complaint was submitted in the topic of state advertising, because we found that it was also an unlawful state aid. It was submitted only 6 years ago, so it is still in progress. The Commission is not able to decide if it has to start the official procedure or not. So we are still waiting. Thanks.
Thank you. No more extra questions for you.
Okay. No, on a more serious note, I think what Ágnes is talking about is also something we see, for example, in relation to the Sovereignty Protection Office. Although, yes, indeed, the Commission was quite quick to announce the infringement procedure back in the beginning of the year, and it decided indeed in October to refer Hungary to the court. It missed a very important opportunity, namely to request interim measures from the Court of Justice of the EU and request the suspension of ongoing investigations against friends and colleagues who are not sitting here today, but I see some of them here in the room. This office, you have to understand, is extremely active and is carrying out investigations in order to silence journalists, civil society organizations, as we sit here on this panel. And despite this, despite all the factual evidence the Commission has at its disposal, despite the legal assessments it has at its disposal, for some reasons beyond my comprehension, it believes that this is a business as usual technical infringement question. Many of you, I think, who sit here have heard of the Central European University. This was Hungary's most prestigious higher education institution. In 2017, the Hungarian government introduced a legislation that drew away the university. The Commission similarly acted swiftly, started an infringement procedure, but didn't request interim measures either. By the time there was a judgment in the case, it was a very beautiful judgment with very important findings, but it was for the history books. The Central European University had left Budapest by then. By the time there is going to be a judgment in the Sovereignty Protection Office case, all of us will have been dragged through the propaganda media and through the mud by the Sovereignty Protection Office, not once, not twice, but dozens of times. I simply can't fathom any logical or political reasons for the lack of bravery that we are seeing when it comes to Article 2 values, when it comes to serious breaches of human rights, and how the Commission and then on many occasions the Council fails, again, this is what I said in my first invention, fails to use the tools at its disposal. I don't think there is a need for additional procedures to, I don't know, come up with whatever other annual reporting and so on. The facts are there, the evidence is there, the analysis is there. The only thing that's left is to make the political decision and act swiftly and firmly. So my biggest, criticism, if you like, regarding whether the EU is part of the problem of the rule of law backsliding or not, no, I don't think it is. The institution would be a problem. I think the way these tools are used are unfortunately not effective enough to defend rule of law and human rights in the current context. But I don't think that the European Union, either as a legal entity or as a concept, would be a part of the problem of the rule of law in Hungary. To the contrary.
Thank you very much. So there are positive elements, but the overall picture is that the EU rule of law mechanisms are not super effective, as reality shows. But let's not read the room in a negative mood. Let's talk about something spirit lifting. So in the last round, I would like to ask you to give us some suggestions on how civil society and EU institutions, including politicians, can work together to better defend the rule of law, because of course autocratic governments tend to create the impression that a cooperation between politicians and civil society is something out of the ordinary, is something negative, that civil society organizations are foreign agents and enemies of the state if they join forces with EU institutions, but it's actually not true. This is their job. This is their job description, to try to convince institutions and politicians to do better. So what would be your suggestions how to improve the cooperation between civil society organizations and EU institutions, including members of the European Parliament? And sorry, but I will start with you.
That's all right. I'm actually, those people who know me, I'm a quite optimistic, positive, kind person. So I lost my temper because I really don't understand what's happening on that issue. But otherwise, I'm very optimistic. And I also have to say that, if you come from Hungary and you work in the sector we work with Ági and Áron, once you start to engage with members of the European Parliament, with European institutions, including the Commission, whom I just criticized harshly, it is a completely different universe. First of all, there is the possibility to speak to members of the parliament, to people working for various DGs, people working in the cabinets of commissioners. When we try to do similar activities here in Hungary, we do not even get a response. With colleagues and friends, we regularly participate in so-called public consultations of draft laws, where it's a quite one-sided communication. We spend the night drafting our opinion on the latest proposal of the government, we submit it, and then nothing comes out. One of the things I at the same time see as a difficulty and that could be improved when it comes, for example, with engagements of the Parliament or the Commission, is that most of Hungarian civil society organizations are smaller, with much fewer members of staff. Language is a barrier still today, unfortunately. And we should think about simplified channels, simplified ways to allow citizens, grassroots groups, less resourced organizations to find the right member of parliament. Because I agree, there is openness from parliamentarians, but also, I have to say, from people working in DGs and the Commission. The problem is that if you are an ordinary, inexperienced person working for civil society, you simply don't know how to reach out, how to do it. And especially because it's not part, unfortunately, of the current Hungarian democratic political culture to engage with decision makers, they don't even see examples, positive examples of how to do it. So my other suggestion, and then I will hand over to Ági, is to actually probably organize proactive campaigns by the European Parliament, but also maybe by the Commission representation here in Budapest, about how people can engage with European institutions, including how to submit a complaint to the European Ombudsman, to the Petitions Committee, to the European Commission, and so on. Because the possibility is there, people are just simply not aware of it.
I will be very short in this round because I think it is so obvious that we need a continuous dialogue. There is a very deep, very profound expertise in the civil society organizations here in Hungary. In other countries, in other era, András would be a minister or somehow, something like that. However, there are brilliant people in the Hungarian NGO sphere, and I ask everyone who is involved in different kind of European Union institutions that please trust in the NGOs. I'm pretty sure that it is not purely a Hungarian example. I'm sure that Polish colleagues also have very deep knowledge about the situation in Poland. And of course, we know that there is a continuous knowledge sharing and very strong networking among autocratic politicians. So I think it is very important to do the same on the democratic side. Because if we are alone, we cannot find a solution. It is very important to share the experiences and share the knowledge.
Yeah. I can only agree, and maybe it's just one idea that worked for us in the British context is a transparent non-partisan group focusing on media freedom, and you can expand it to rule of law, however you want to focus this group. But I really think, just as you said, that it's good to look over party borders when it comes to the basic values.
Let's take the applaud to the end so that we have more time for the answers. I think on civil society, I agree it's not always easy to understand how it works. I remember that for some time we had in the European Parliament regular meetings, both with lawyers and judges from Hungary, but also from Poland. And maybe we have to make this more regular, in spite of all the difficulties with our meetings, but that would help. We also should increase the funding for civil society. There is a budget for civil society organizations, for human rights defenders, but we need to increase it. And here is a very special problem. If we want to do that, we have to talk about an increased European budget. We need own resources because the European budget is very small compared to the national budgets. I may also say it's the one thing to support civil society organizations, but I think it's of same importance to bring citizens together, so that people have a chance to see that things can be done in totally different ways. And therefore I think not only the Erasmus programs should be strengthened, but also we should use all the citizen partnerships to bring people together. And I'm very proud that, for example, in my own hometown, I'm sure there are many other examples, we have a partnership with a Polish city that we kept on going even during the time of the peace government, because it was not on the government or the mayor, but bringing people together. And we also have a 50-year-old partnership with a town in Romania, which also was not always easy. But I think all these things, the partnerships, Erasmus programs, all these have to be increased, because it's the people that in the end have to take a decision. And to that extent, if I may make a final point, also all these border controls in the Schengen area have to be stopped, because they hinder people, especially in areas close to a border, to keep contact to each other. And therefore this is very dangerous, not only for economic reasons, but especially for bringing European citizens together.
Thank you. Before I give you the floor, let me just say that we are doing pretty well with the time. So I think that we will have a couple of minutes for questions. So please, if you have a question, jot it down, because we don't have much time to break the ice. So we will come to the questions after the end of this round, but please continue the answers.
Okay, just one additional comment to the previous question. So maybe Europe was not prepared to face with a Russian enemy called Viktor Urbán, because he's acting like a puppet of Vladimir Putin, because the European Union was created as a peace project and not something else. And we must mention also that Hungary is still a European country, and the Hungarian citizens are the most pro-Europeans among the European Union, more than 70%. So in one territory, when Orbán and his propaganda failed, it's the European Union we still love. We're still in love with the European Union. Coming back to this topic, in the last term I was serving as a member of the European Parliament, and it was always a pleasure and a very good experience to work together with civil organizations. These organizations here in Hungary have very, very good experts, very helpful experts. I could always rely on them. And the other experience was when we formed a shadow government with the Democratic Coalition led by Klára Dobrev. We organized a lot of events. We created a program, a kind of Back to Europe program, showing an alternative, a European alternative to Hungary. And those events show that politicians and civil organizations can work very effectively together. And I'm sure that when the time will come, we can rebuild this country together very effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, there are many practical things that could elevate this relationship. Yes, make more funds, make the funds more accessible, because to be honest, if you are a smaller organization or a group of citizens, it's pretty impossible to apply for an EU fund because of the bureaucratic requirements that it entails. Someone from the European Commission could finally tell me why we need to work on the rule of law report during the holiday season, and why they publish it in the end of July, where pretty much everyone is on vacation from the EU, and also people from the press is definitely not going to pick up on it. So why the timing? And this is something that could be very easy to fix. More people could contribute, and a lot more attention could follow the report. And there are numerous other practical issues. The thing that I wanted to mention is that I think what could make this relationship a bit better is if the EU and the institutions wouldn't commit the same mistake twice. So as András said, it wasn't just because of us that we said that an interim measure should be applied in Hungary. Bulgaria has adopted a similar legislation as the Hungarian propaganda law, which we all know originates from Russia. Don't let it slide. Be more active, be more quick, have an interim. It's not rocket science. What these types of governments and what these populist politicians are doing and advocating are very, very similar. One thing, and this is the good part of being a laboratory in Hungary, is that we pretty much can tell what is going to happen. So use this knowledge, use the knowledge of the Hungarian civil society, use the knowledge and experience of the Polish civil societies, Slovakian, the Bulgarian. We've seen this, we know how it will go down, and I think this is something which we still, and when I say we as the EU don't learn enough from it. These are not things that just happen out of thin air. There are very clear signs. I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but if the EU and if the Commission just lets the Sovereignty Protection Office fly, or it's not acting accordingly, other countries will come up with a similar idea. It will happen in other countries. So yeah, I mean, it's fine to make a mistake, but please don't do it twice in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all the answers. So we have a couple of minutes left, and I don't want to steal your break. So we will collect 2 questions from the audience, if you have any. So please, if you have a question, just raise your hand now. This is your okay, please. And please make it short, not a commentary, just a question.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I wanted to ask about specifically the news landscape in Hungary and the European Union at large. We see that Orbán has been really effective at taking over news outlets in Hungary, and we've also heard stories of the European Conservative and Euronews also having influence from Orbán. Is the European Union ready to deal with the new landscape that's perhaps upcoming? Thank you.
Was it clear? Mm-hmm. Okay. That's one question. Second question.
Well, thank you very much. I will have a very short question. 3.5 million Hungarians live under the self-government of democratic parties, including Budapest and other big cities. What would be the role of the city councils, county councils, where the opposition has a majority?
Thank you. So, very quick round. You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but if you do, please make it short. So let's start with Áron.
And maybe the second question is more going to Hungarian experts regarding the role of regional organizations. The question, is Europe ready to work with it? To be honest, we have to check with the Commission, having in mind that we have more right-wing racist governments. It might be very difficult. It's also difficult within the European Parliament because we not only have 3 very far right-wing political groups, but as you already mentioned, especially the Conservatives are turning more and more to the right side. And we had a decision only last week in the plenary where the Conservatives supported really ugly, discriminative, I have no better word for it, amendments both from the ESN and the Patriots, 2 very far right groups. And the only positive thing in the end is that a big majority in the parliament then voted against the text to set a signal to the EPP group. If you want to work together with the far right, you can do it, but this has consequences. So, to be honest, we are still checking to what extent we are ready to work with these new majorities.
Anybody else would like to weigh in?
Just one comment to the second question. So in the last term I was a rapporteur in Direct Funds live program, and I can say that the European Parliament with the Commission almost doubled the direct funds in this live program, because it was a very important campaign topic for us, and we wanted to make it happen. As we saw exactly that the municipalities and local governments, especially the opposition local governments, cannot have money from the government. So I think it would be a very important, so to say, homework to this legislation to keep this money for the European citizens, for the Hungarian citizens, and give it directly to the local governments, to the civil organizations, as they need it. Anyway, they won't get any financial support from the Orbán government. If the Orbán government will receive any money from the Commission, then they will steal it, every cent, every euro cent from it. So the money is in safe with the local governments. Thank you.
Áron, Lisa, András?
Yeah, just I will not be very popular in this, but I'm highly critical with opposition local governments as well. And I think if we learned one thing from the past era is, no matter whether you are trying to act nice and trying to, don't cause any stir with the central government, Fidesz will come after you and after your money, so it doesn't matter. So at the same time, you could actually support the local civil society, you could support great initiatives, because it's really not about, folding in line. And what we see in many opposition-led cities in Hungary is that they are somehow trying to be the lighter version or the more presentable version of the local government, actually mainstreaming ideas that are not so great. I'll say an example. So the local government of Pécs, which is an opposition government, actively campaigned against the Pécs Pride and the LGBTI rights in Pécs, and I think that's very, very far from what an opposition government, a progressive government, local government should do. So my advice would be a bit more brave, because your funding really doesn't matter on the values that you stand up for. Thank you.
I was laughing because usually have the feeling that it doesn't really make any sense to have Áron and me on the same panel because, yeah, I wanted to say I'm lucky I'm not a politician. I don't have to be popular because it's not just about the example that Áron brought up regarding LGBT issues. But let's be honest. We can only name a handful of municipalities where there was a change in 2019, so 5 years ago, where, for example, the local media became more balanced and independent. So, or where local citizens had more effective ways to engage in local community life and decision making. And you know, if I want to be very positive, I can say, well, we all are in a learning phase, and new mayors and councillors in these cities also have to learn how to do it. But 5 years have passed, and I'm not really seeing many of these initiatives popping up all over the country. So I think there is time to self-scrutinize. The other comment that the young gentleman said, I think, points to a very important risk that is very understood and studied, is how the Hungarian government is using the immense amount of wealth that was accumulated over the past decade and a half to build political alliances and to build media interests outside of Hungary, and not just in other EU countries, like it happened in Slovenia, or as it happened with the financing of the far right in France, for example, but also in countries that are in the neighborhood policy program, that are candidate countries, mainly in the Balkans. The Hungarian government has an extremely strong relationship with the Georgian government. So I think that that threat is not talked about enough. I also don't have ready-made answers on what to do, but I'm very glad that you brought this up, because I think this is the responsibility of, for example, such a renowned alliance of think tanks who are present here to try to think about how to uncover and how to tackle this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Ágnes, Lisa, something to add? No? Okay. Then there is nothing left than to conclude this conversation. Thank you very much for all the panelists for participating. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you very much for your questions and for attending this panel. We will have a very short break, 10 minutes, and then we will continue with another discussion in 10 minutes. So please come back.